This is It's in the Details with A. LaFay. People often ask, how do you know when you have enough details or too many? Let's start with enough details. You have enough when readers can create a specific picture in their mind. He was sad. Does this create a picture? Probably not a very specific one. So let's try again. Eli tucked himself between the wall and the bookshelf. Scrolling through his photos, he stopped on the shot of Becky, greeting the newfie on the trail. Letting the tears flow, he remembered her laughing as a dog licked her face. Do you see it now? I bet you do. Let's take a closer look. We notice the details. For instance, the characters are named Eli and Becky. Location. Eli is tucked between the shelf and the wall. Here we see specific body language, specific location, and we have a strong sense of emotion even before we're exactly sure of what caused this emotion. We see him in action, scrolling through photos. And now we move on to an emotional trigger. That's an element in the text, be it a piece of fiction or poetry, that triggers an emotion. Seeing that shot of Becky on the trail, we have a reaction of crying. So, a lot of times the specificity of detail is what allows us to see something specific. Now, it doesn't have to be this long, drawn-out story about Eli and Becky, but notice how much more we experience purely by knowing these details. Now let's look at what happens when we use too many. Scrolling through his 513 photos on his iPhone 6, he stopped on the 4,984 shot. It was of Becky greeting the huge black Newfoundland on the trail to the little Grand Canyon. Letting the tears flow down his cheeks until his eyes blurred and his breath caught in his throat, Eli remembered Becky's tinkling laughter as a dog licked her left cheek. There's a lot of extra details, plus a little repetition in here. And, as I noticed on the earlier slide, Becky's name changes just slightly, which happens a lot as we revise. Let's look at when these details are unnecessary. The specific number of photos in his iPhone don't matter. What the number of the shot in the sequence of over 5,000 isn't important. The fact that Becky was greeting a dog on the trail is important. Is it important that it's huge and black? Newfoundlands almost always are. So the fact that it's a Newfie is enough. You could say the trail to Little Grand Canyon, but let's think about what's important in that. It's the fact that it's not their dog, that they met it on a trail. Where they were headed is not the emotionally important part. It's the meeting between the person and the dog. Sometimes we like to emphasize how sad someone really is by using a lot of wordage. We might try something literary by adding more than one flow. We talk about it flowing down their cheeks, but really tears don't go much. We assume the cheek part because that's where tears start. The blurriness and the breath caught in the throat both emphasize how emotional he is, but I think the fact that he's wedged between the shelf and the wall is much more revealing, and that's something we don't have here. I think that this description is much more familiar and common, but showing him wedged between the wall and the bookshelf is unusual and specific. The tinkling laughter, the tinkling part, may be kind of specific, but it's really out of place with the emotional tone of the rest of the paragraph. And it really doesn't matter which cheek the dog was licking. So let's look at some elements we can look at when we are examining details. For instance, we could check whether or not they're double duty. Do they tell us more than one thing? For instance, by including the newfie, it means A, She probably liked dogs, and B, we know dogs well enough to use their nicknames. It says a little bit about the people, both Eli and Becky. The specificity part, it's good to know when you're being too specific. 5,013 photos on iPhone 6 versus specific enough to give us an image, but not so specific that you're giving us too many details, such as the left cheek. Are the details vicarious? Do they make us feel as if we are there viewing this or being a part of the scene? Are the details we used for emotional emphasis? And are they an example of undercutting? By having us see that he is crying, but not over describing his emotional state, it allows us to feel the emotion, but not be carried away by it. This is an example of undercutting. Undercutting is when you state something very directly and matter-of-factly, and you don't use a lot of descriptive words. Also, it's important to test the forward momentum of the story. The second version of this moment for Eli is much longer and would delay the forward momentum of the story, which relates directly to the concept of literary weight. Literary weight is the amount of emphasis placed on an element in fiction or poetry or nonfiction through the amount of details used to describe it. If you have a lot of details, then that particular element should have a lot of literary weight. So the literary weight in this situation should be on the emotional connection between Becky and the dog, and more importantly, between Becky and Eli. So the number of photos on his phone, the type of phone he has, and the order the photo appears, these are not important details, so they should have zero literary weight. So when you're looking at literary weight, the amount of detail should be directly balanced with the importance of what you're describing to the overall piece you're creating. And remember, less can be more. It is true that sometimes we use too few words, like he was sad, but sometimes we use too many. So it's very important to balance them according to their importance in a story. This has been a Typewrite Bite with Ayla Faye at Sylvanosity. I hope it was helpful to you. Right on, folks.